Lag.
All right. Welcome, everybody. And thank you so much for joining us for the Sisters in Solidarity Network Reentry webinar learning series. My name is Tanaj Moody, and I am the Director of Capacity Building at the National Black Women's Justice Institute. And this series is all about amplifying the leadership and expertise of formerly incarcerated Black women who are literally shaping the reentry world and what it should look like and what services and programs should look like. At the National Black Women's Justice Institute, we are a Black women-led national nonprofit that leads research, capacity building, and public education to advance healing-centered policies and practices that ultimately will dismantle pathways to criminalization and confinement and really increases opportunities and safety for Black women and girls who are directly impacted by the criminal and juvenile legal systems. So that is our mission for folks that are joining on today's webinar and for folks that may be just learning about the work that we do at the National Black Women's Justice Institute. And today, really excited because this webinar is launching our Reentry webinar learning series and is also a part of the launch of our Sisters in Solidarity Network Reentry Toolkit, which we are going to be launching at the end of September. And this toolkit, just to keep this on everyone's radar, is a practical resource for reentry providers, advocates, policymakers, and community organizations that has been developed with the insights and experiences of formerly incarcerated Black women across the country. It's a one of its kind that hasn't really been done often in this field, and we're really excited to launch this at the end of September. So each of these webinars that hopefully you're participating in, as well as sharing with your community, is really exploring different core pillars that are part of this toolkit through research, through lived experience, and most importantly, of course, like actionable strategies that are practical that can be implemented into reentry practices every day. And so with today, we're really focusing on family reunification and what does that mean? And so for many folks that are just joining or are unaware of what family reunification means in reentry specifically, what we're going to be talking around is understanding how many women returning from home um, may feel like outsiders from their own families. And most times of what we've been seeing is that women come home sometimes unprepared with the appropriate resources and programs to support them emotionally, physically, as well as supporting motherhood as well after incarceration. And what research has shown is that without the appropriate social and maternal support that they need to succeed, as well as like the lack of programs that are truly designed specifically for Black women and children, that it makes it very difficult to sustain family reunification. And Black women specifically are significantly impacted by this. And really it can increase their risk of future reincarceration if the right programs and services are not tailored to their needs. And so family reunification is a core part of reentry that we really need to be talking about more often. Um, and so today, I'm honored to be joined by the Pamela Winn, a powerhouse of purpose, a justice warrior, policy architect, and storytelling alchemist. With a nurse's heart and an advocate's fire, Miss Winn turns pain into power and policy into progress. She's not just a voice for women who have been incarcerated. She's the voice reshaping the system with bold reform like the Women's Care Act. And whether testifying before lawmakers, building coalitions across states, or cultivating healing through art, gardening, and community, Ms. Pamela Winn moves with clarity, strategy, and soul. Pamela doesn't just fight for change, she embodies change. She is the change. So I'm just going to snap to you, Pamela. Thank you so much for being here with us today. Really appreciate you. And, before we really dive into today's discussion, I would love to just start with the heart of your journey. And, your story has inspired millions, hundreds of people all around. And I'd love for anyone who's joining, the listeners today, to really hear about how that's started. Would you love to share a little bit about, what that powerful journey is? What's led you to this of your experience? It shaped your vision for your organization, Restore Her.
Sure. First of all, I appreciate you having me here and inviting me to talk about this. Unification is very imperative to any woman's reentry, as well as her whole journey through the criminal legal process. Because as we know, the majority of these women do have kids that are under 18. And as we also know, the woman is the foundation of the household. So when we remove a mother or a woman out of the household, basically, we're crippling the entire family. Um, it just trickles down to everyone, not just that mother and those kids, but the entire family. So yes. How did I get here? First, I will say that I never imagined myself being here, listening to you read that and talk about me and my work, words that I never would have expected anybody to be reciting about myself, especially in this space. I'm from Atlanta, Georgia, originally, born, bred, raised, lived there. All things, as the song say, I'm so ATL. I'm all things Atlanta. And in that, I come from what's considered a typical Southern Black family, meaning that my family was uneducated and low income. So I grew up basically with an aspiration to change the generational dynamics of my family, which looked like being educated and creating opportunities for my family. So we weren't just stuck in the same cycle of being living in the projects and accepting the things that came along with that. And of course, in that, I pretty much was self-taught because, again, from my environment, there was no one doing the things that I set out to do. So I didn't have anyone to guide me or that I could refer back to for information or when I didn't know something. Just kind of figured things out on my own as I went. And that could be a blessing and a curse. It was a blessing because I was a sponge for knowledge, thirst for finding things, inventing things, innovating things. But also it was a curse because in not knowing what I was doing, I ended up making some poor business decisions that landed me a 78-month federal sentence for a white collar crime. And during that incarceration, when I was arrested, I was being held in a holding facility. I had not at this time been convicted of anything yet. I was in the process of going back and forth to court to determine, what that outcome would look like. And the prosecutors refused to give me a bond. So basically, I was being held and had not been convicted. And during that time, I found out that I was pregnant. Um, so during intake, they usually, is like a physical assessment, nothing major, but one of the questions, of course, which we as women are used to hearing is, when was your last menstrual cycle? And for me, mine had been like a couple of months ago. But that wasn't uncommon to me because I have a late cycle. My cycle, has always been irregular. But it prompted them to give me a urine pregnancy test, and that test came back positive. Now, I did not expect that. Um, and nor did the folks at the facility that I was being held at. Um, the room went from a lot of different jovial conversations to dead silence and a thick tension in the room. And at the time, I didn't know what that tension was about, because I had not known the results of the test yet. It wasn't until the nurse asked me, which pregnancy is this for you? And I was like, excuse me? She was like, how many times, have you been pregnant? Which pregnancy is this? And I said, which pregnancy is this? I said, what did the test say? And she was like, oh, your test was positive. And so that was when I understood, how why the gravity of the room changed, because it changed for me as well. A lot of emotions. Um, I was elated because during that time I was in a loving relationship with someone that I had talked about spending my life with, and so knowing that we had created a life out of love, made me happy. But in the same moment, I was um I don't know, just stunned silent because I didn't know what to think. My mind was like, can I be happy? I'm sitting here in this jail. I don't know how long I'm going to be here. I don't know what the outcome is going to be. I don't know what this looks like. It was just too many unknowns. And of course I was scared because now I had to make some tough choices, and what was the right choice. But unfortunately, I didn't get to make any choices. All of the choices were made for me. And that being one, shackling me when I was being transported to court, which caused me to fall, and I started having complications with my pregnancy. And from there, being told that there was nothing that they could do for me. Um, Nothing at all, not even provide me a prenatal vitamin. And so in the issues that I was having, the complications I was having with my pregnancy after the fall included bleeding, with my pregnancy, and they couldn't even take me out to be seen, to see what was happening to me. And the doctor that was working at the facility was like, she was a family practitioner. So this was not her specialty. They told me that they did not contract with OBGYN, so there was no one that they could call to come see me. And so what I was told initially was, you need to tell your lawyer to do whatever he can to get you out of here. This place was built for men. We didn't expect to have women, and definitely not a pregnant woman. I did relay that information to my lawyer. And however, the prosecutor still refused to give me a bond. And so I went back. And again, even with them knowing that I had issues, I wrote requests to be seen by medical. Because, like, when I fell, nobody checked me. They didn't even ask me if I was okay. They just got me up, put me on a van, and took me on the court. And so I wrote medical requests asking to be seen, telling them that I was experiencing bleeding for over 2 weeks with no response at all. And like I said, and when I finally got a response, that was the response, that there was nothing that they could do for me and I needed to get out of there. So when I notified them that my attorney had did what he could and I still was not going to get a bond, so I was going to be there, my question to them was, now what? I'm not going anywhere. How are we going to deal with this? And so the only solution that the director said that she knew would be to send a request to the U.S. Marshals asking to take me out to the ER to be seen. And she did that and it was approved, but the turnaround time was 4 weeks. So 4 weeks later, on top of the over 2 weeks of sending the request, it had been about 7 or 8 weeks now. And they took me to the ER and again shackled to the ER. And when we got there, only to hear from the ER doctor that, this had happened weeks ago. So it wasn't deemed an emergency at this point. And he just notified them that I needed to see an obstetrician, or better yet, a perinatologist, because at this point I was considered high risk because I was bleeding, one, and because of the state of my situation of being incarcerated, two. And so their response was they had to take me back to the jail because they were only approved to bring me to the ER. So that called for another request to go see an obstetrician, which was approved. But again, another 4 weeks of turnaround to get that approval. Um, I went to see the obstetrician. The first thing she said was she needed a stat ultrasound to know the status of my baby. She did not have an ultrasound machine in her office. However, her office was located um, in the on the hospital grounds. So it was just a matter of walking across the parking lot to the hospital to do the procedure. But we were told no. The officer stated that we were only approved to come to her office, which meant another request, another 4 weeks. And I was brought out again to get the ultrasound. I did receive it. However, it was a technician that gave it to me. Technicians are not certified to read the results of ultrasounds. And so we had to put in another request, another 4 weeks for me to get the results from the obstetrician. And that last 4 weeks, I did not make it. I ended up miscarrying my baby, which was a whole nother traumatic experience because at 10 o'clock at night, they would lock us down. And I started having cramping, after lockdown, shortly after lockdown, that turned into full blown contractions. That also, feeling a gush of fluid come out of me, but because the cell was dark, not being able to see what it was. And the woman that was in my room and the other women that were in the pod with me, hearing them beating and screaming on doors for hours, trying to get attention of someone to come and help us. And they beat for hours because it was close to 3 o'clock in the morning before anybody ever showed up. And at that time, when they opened the cell door, the gush that I had felt was blood and it was everywhere. I was hemorrhaging. And I had to listen to them debate, the medical staff and the correctional officers debate about what to do with me because they didn't know. The correctional officers wanted to call the marshals. The medical staff wanted to call 911. And again, I was bleeding. So now not only was I afraid for my baby, I was afraid for myself. And I just remember begging the nurse to please call 911, which eventually she did. I was met at the door by the officers who shackled me to the bed by a wrist and an ankle. And that's how I endured the remainder of my miscarriage with two male guards between my legs who refused to give me any privacy. Um, and then once they got the bleeding stable and were able to give me an ultrasound, they discovered that I had passed my baby. And they looked through my linen, it wasn't there. And they were questioning about the linen that I had come with. And then I heard the officers tell the nurse that yes, it was there and that they had thrown it in the trash. Um, and, to hear that my child, something that was a part of me, had been discarded as trash, and the tone of the officer was as if that's what he believed, that it was trash. Was I don't I've never, as many times as I've talked about this, I have still not been able to come up with a word to truly describe how I felt in that moment, to say what that feeling was like to hear that, to experience that. I would just say it's, when I think of all of the low times in my life, that is the lowest to hear that. And And then from there, I refused the DNC because I was afraid to be put to sleep, because no, my family, nobody knew where I was, because you can't notify anybody when they take you out. And then when I returned back to the facility, they placed me in solitary confinement, where I remained for about 8 months, which was the total time that it took me to go to court, be sentenced, and be designated to a federal facility. And, so to come home and for people to tell me there was nothing that I could do about what had happened to me is what has me sitting here and doing the work that I do now.
I just want to take a second to just like acknowledge your vulnerable strength in this moment. Because as many times, like you said, like I mean, you're a national speaker, right? Like, so like you share
And
your
the
story
question that
often.
everybody always wants to know.
Yeah. And I imagine though, like, that that's not an easy thing to share. It's heavy.
Right.
And so I just wanted to acknowledge you. And
Especially that one piece of it. I think I can get through all the rest of it in a breath, but that one piece of it still tugs at me heavily as many times as I've told it.
yeah, yeah. No, I can understand that for sure. And I think personally it's just like, I'm sorry that that even is something that you had to experience.
Thank you.
And I'm thinking of all of, because I know Pamela, it's like, that's what guides you in your heart, right? Like that's your heart work. And I'm thinking of all of the women that have to endure and experience that as well. And I just want to like really appreciate and thank you and acknowledge you and uplift you and just hold you for a second before we even like, you know what I'm saying, shift, because that right there, you sharing what you just shared is so important for people to understand why having these kinds of conversations and why listening to your story as well as like other women who have been impacted by this legal system and how it's impacted not just them but their families,
Right.
right? And then the generations to come from there. Um, and so I just want to thank you so much. And you have really turned your pain into something that is so powerful. And warrior is like the exact way to describe you, because that indeed you are. And, with the work that you're doing with Restore Her. And for folks that don't know, for folks that are just joining in here, Tim, I don't want to speak on your organization, but, for Restore Her US America, for folks that may not know, they're a policy advocacy reentry organization that obviously is founded by Pamela Winn and is also uh, led by and for justice impacted women of color based in Georgia. And from what you're sharing, that's what's led you to this work. Do you
Yeah,
want to share a little bit more around the mission, really like with Restore Her, like,
sure.
and a little bit about what that impact has been on the community? And I guess I'd be curious too if you can generally speak from your organization and the way that you're working with mothers specifically, right, who are returning from home, what are you seeing as the unique challenges that mothers are facing in reentry programs that some reentry programs are missing or are underestimating?
Sure. So, as you said, Restore Her, we are a policy advocacy organization. When I made the decision to get into this work, for me, I sat down and I thought long and hard, what I felt like would make the greatest impact, because it was important to me for everyone that told me that I couldn't do anything. I can't, to show them that, yes, I can. And so I decided that the most impactful way for me to represent the women in my work would be to change the law. Um, for me, I was like that put like a exclamation point, the period, everything on it. If we change the law, and you can't do that anymore, so now you can't. So don't tell me I can't. You can't. And so that's how we were born. Um, and the name Restore Her for me is personal because I felt like I left the first time anybody asked me about what being incarcerated was like. I told them I left whole, but I came back in pieces. And so now I'd work to restore those pieces. And make them back whole again. And if you can see in the background my logo, that's a representation of. And so that's the policy work is the foundation of what we do. And for me, it was important that no other woman be able to tell the story that I just told, because it wasn't just a me thing. It's not just a Georgia thing. It's not just a black woman. It happens everywhere to all women. It's not an isolated incident. This is how it is for women that are pregnant and incarcerated. These are the things, a small number of the things that the women incur, and I didn't want that to continue. Um, and so, and the other programming that we do, everything that we do is rooted from our policy work. So, from doing policy work and, identifying gaps in when we're giving testimony and we're asked things or things come up that we can't um, answer, or we don't have enough of what we need for that, we created programs to help us get what we needed to support the policy work that we do. So all of the programming is in support of the policy work that we do. And so we do education, um, through education, through health, through leadership. Those are the ways that, our work shows up.
I love that. And we're gonna get of the policy work as well in a moment here for folks that are interested in. And as you're sharing, I want to drop this in the chat because I know folks, I see some people in this chat already showing you love, Pamela. I want to just share this for everybody. This is RestoreHer's website for folks that are joining in and want to learn more around from what Pamela has shared so far. And with the work around, right, like specifically around like the policy advocacy side of things, can you talk a little bit about, from the work that Restore Her is doing? I really want to touch on the specific issues and or challenges that you're seeing um, for justice impacted mothers, right? That are facing reentry programs that may not be providing sufficient resources programming. Can you share about one of the things that I've noticed is like you were instrumental in passing the Women's Care Act in Georgia specifically, which is really amazing. And I wanted to really touch on what is the Women's Care Act in Georgia for folks that may not be familiar, and speaking more on how that victory is connecting to the broader goals of Restore Her around family reunification.
So the Women's Care Act. The Women's Care Act is actually a successor piece of legislation. The first piece of legislation and what we're most known for was the Dignity for Incarcerated Women's Act. That was initially created by the National Council. And what I did was they had their version, and that was the version that I initially started out advocating for passage on. It was a federal legislation. It went nowhere. It was sponsored by Senator Cory Booker, former Vice President Harris, and Elizabeth Warren. And the reason that it got no traction is because the three of them were going to be on the next presidential ticket, which they were. And in politics, they didn't want to allow them to go into a presidential race with any kind of momentum. And they felt like that bill would have gave them that momentum. So I was able to team up with another organization that was also working with Senator Booker on this federal bill. And they wanted to take the bill to the states. And so that's what we did. And however, the initial dignity bill, it didn't sit with me. It was an important bill. It asked for like feminine hygiene products, women being placed closer to home, in trauma informed training for officers, and those type of things. But that wasn't really my story. My story was being shackled and placed in solitary. So I drafted my own version of the bill that spoke to my experiences, that included, banning shackling, banning solitary confinement, squatting and coughing of pregnant women, and cavity searches, which is something that is also done to women that are pregnant by officers. And so I just wrote language that, that pertained to me and what I had gone through. And it passed. I passed it in Georgia. And I was also blessed to be able to put the language in the federal bill, the First Step Act. And that was important to me because although I'm from Georgia and my occurrence was in Georgia, I was also in federal prison. So it was important for me to do that for my sisters that were serving federal time, as well. And it just kind of took off on its own, and it just started. We were able to advocate for the passing of it in other states. I think for me, one of the most proudest and the most powerful places that we passed it at, because of who I was working with, which was my sister Christy Puckett in North Carolina. At that time, she was working with the ACLU, and they had reached out to me, and I worked with them. And we have a picture, she and I, of us both flanking the governor of North Carolina. And I always tell people that's my favorite picture because to me it's a very powerful picture for the both of us that had been incarcerated. We both had been pregnant during our incarceration, to be standing, flanking this man who ran the state of North Carolina, and we were able to convince the folks of North Carolina to pass this legislation to stop, the shackling and solitary confinement of pregnant women there. Um, we passed the bill. It's been passed in about 26 states now. And so the Women's Care Act was born from that bill. And the reason that it was born is because although it's great to hear that we passed the bill in so many states, it's not great when it's not being implemented. And that was the problem that we were facing. We were still getting many calls and many messages from women saying they were still being shackled, still being placed in solitary confinement. Right here in Georgia, we had a woman that was full term, that the officers ignored her. She had her baby alone in solitary. And by the time they paid her some attention and got her to the hospital, her baby passed. And she, did a $25 million lawsuit against the state for that. So I knew that we needed something else. And to be honest with you, I wasn't even upset that it was not being implemented because for me, it gave me the leverage to do what I really wanted to do, and that was remove pregnant women out of the jails and prisons. And so that's what, and keep families together. So that's what the Women's Care Act was created to do. And so the way that the bill works is that if a woman is arrested, if she has not bonded out in 72 hours, she's given a urine pregnancy test. If the test is positive, she's automatically allowed to bond out. And during that time, if she is convicted and sentenced to serve time, her sentence is deferred from a minimum to 12 weeks up to 12 months. before she has to come back to serve her time, which allows her to be a family with her baby for that period of time. Because there are so many things here in Georgia in the South period, like when you deliver your baby in jail, you get 2 hours max with your baby. If you get that, is at the discretion of the officer. A lot of time they cite that they have a staffing shortage, so you may not even get that time. You have 24 hours to name a caregiver for your baby. If that caregiver does not pick the baby up in a 24-hour period, you lose your baby to Family and Children Services, and these women ultimately lose their parental rights to their baby. So imagine serving time and you don't know where your brand new baby is, who's caring for it, and then you have to get out, find your baby, and then fight to get your baby back because you lost your rights. All pregnancies are induced. So the women are not deemed important enough for anybody to get up out their bed at night if this woman goes into labor. So we're inducing everybody's labor Monday through Friday during work hours. You're scheduled to have your baby. Also, if you've ever had a cesarean section, you don't get the option to come back and have a vaginal birth. If you had a C-section before, you're gonna get a C-section. So there's no autonomy over that woman's pregnancy, over her child. And so these are things that, and these are things that are important. When the babies are born, there is no breastfeeding. There is no pumping the breast milk and, making sure that your baby, they're not doing any of that. And we all know that when babies are born, breastfeeding is very critical for creating antibodies for that baby. We also know how important it is for the babies to bond with their mothers, in the first part of their life or whatever. But those things are not an option for a woman that delivers while incarcerated. And so the Women's Care Act is designed to change all of that, to allow, for family to stay together, for that woman to be with her baby, to have autonomy over her pregnancy and the care of her newborn baby. And also, another important thing, many of these facilities do not bring women back for postpartum checkups. And we know that the postpartum period is up to 12 months. Many women experience postpartum depression, postpartum psychosis. None of this stuff is ever diagnosed. None of this stuff is ever never treated. You're just pretty much on your own in prison trying to figure it out and maintain your sanity the best, way that you can. And so that's why we created the Women's Care Act. And we were successful in passing it in Colorado in 2023.
Wow. Wow. So is that 27 states now?
Yeah, 27 states with bills, yes.
Look at y'all. Oh, that's amazing. And obviously, this is essential and it's needed. And like as you're sharing, for folks that are on here listening, right? Like whether they're reentry providers or reentry organizations or just advocates and activists, in doing this work, you've been touching a lot on policy as a pathway to family reunification. We
Right.
shared a little bit around this intersection of motherhood and barriers, reentry barriers, right? And so can you touch a little bit on even it, you touched on this a little bit, but even more specific if you can, why do you feel like the family reunification, and I'm honing in on this family reunification piece for folks because this is also one of the core pillars that we talk about in the reentry toolkit and just needing to be one of your success metrics, right? On like how is your resources and programs serving the women you're working with? This needs to
Sure.
be one of them, right?
Exactly.
So Pamela, can you talk a little bit about that? Like, why is family reunification like one of the most important measures of reentry success?
Right. So like, not only do we do policy advocacy, when we describe the organization, it's a policy advocacy reentry organization. So reentry is very essential as far as family reunification unification goes, because when As I said earlier, when you remove a woman out of a household, we all know that women are the foundation. And when a woman is removed, that household just disintegrates. And if we want to look at like right now with juvenile crime and what's going on with juveniles, it's because many of them don't have the mother in the home. And what is so interesting to me, if you Google the number of homes that don't have, a mother present. I'm sorry, present, there's not a result for it. You don't get anything back. But what you will get back, it can tell you the number of homes that don't have a father in the home, but nothing about the mother, when the mother is the critical piece of the puzzle. And like for me, not only was I pregnant, I also had two sons that were at home, 14 and 16 years old at the time. And they were at home alone. I didn't have support. They were taking care of themselves. And 14 to 16 years old is a critical, age in a young person's life. Is that time when they can go either right or left. And I was blessed that, my sons were rooted in the foundation. I had created a foundation for them that they stayed close to. And, when I came home, they were 19 and 21. They had both graduated, they had received scholarships, they were in college. But I know that that's not the norm for most women. And coming home, although they were successful in maintaining themselves, it was very difficult. Um, when men leave home and when they come home, you got your mama, aunt, sister, girlfriend, baby mama, wife. You have all these different folks that are taking care of your kids for you. Women don't, we're not blessed with that. And when men come home, they're usually told, take your time, get yourself together. We got the kids. When mothers come home, is here are your kids. So not only do they have to work on rebuilding their own lives, now they got to rebuild their lives, but also figure out housing for that baby, figure out employment to be able to feed those kids, and figure out daycare because the child has to be watched over while, the mother is out trying to make a living to provide for them all. And, even with myself, there was a period of almost 3 years that I wasn't able to find employment. So it's difficult. We don't have the same program as men, not half as many as they have inside or outside. So coming out and trying to figure things out, the first step is where do you go first to even get any kind of help? And it's just really difficult. Like here in the state of Georgia, we don't have a state recommended halfway house for women. We have it for men, but not for women. So a lot of women will sit a lot longer incarcerated than they have to because they don't have an address that they can provide that they're going to be released to. Our federal halfway house beds 13 women to 200 men. So just, something as simple as housing is very difficult. Here in Georgia is also challenging because when you have a background, nobody wants to rent to you. There are so many things that you're limited from. As they say, there are over 40,000 collateral consequences that you have to deal with when you have a criminal background. And so these are all things that women have to navigate on a higher level because there's less resources and less programming, less of everything that's available to them.
I appreciate you for sharing, and I got kicked out for a second, but I'm glad I came back on. Because from what I hear and from what you are sharing, and I think this is really important. You had mentioned, women are the foundation, right,
Yes.
in the home. And I think that's really important to touch on because the impact that that can have on generations, right? When a mother is trying to balance all of these different things upon their reentry, you were sharing employment, even to the simplest things of bonding, right?
Right.
And then being able to
That was a hard
find
one for me.
child.
Because when I left, again, my sons were 14 and 16. And when I came home, they were 19 and 21. So
Mhm.
again, I didn't have support, so I didn't see my sons all the years that I was gone. So it was like coming home and having to reestablish a relationship with my sons. And prior to me leaving, we were extremely close, like very close. I was very present, with them. And now, trying to get to know them as young men. They're no longer, boys. It was very difficult. There was a lot of head bumping, because when you add on the layer that they're young men now, and add to that not only are they young men, they have been out here pretty much taking care of themselves while I was away. It was very difficult. There were a lot of days where I would feel like, this is too much. I'm just going to let them do whatever they want to do, and, and live their lives how they want to. But then after, a day and that frustration had worn off, my heart would say, no, these are mine, these are my boys. And I'm not just going to leave them out there to, end up however, wherever, so if we have to fight every day, we're going to fight every day, but I'm going to be here. I'm going to be present, and I'm going to do what needs to be done. And when I got home, although they were 19 and 21, they were still looking at me like, now what? Looking for me to lead them. And that's how the kids are, with the mothers.
I appreciate you for sharing. And I want to really touch on the housing aspect and that being the foundation. And apologies, I'm having some tech issues on my end. And so I keep getting cut out and cut in, but I am catching you. And I want to talk around the housing piece though that you're touching on, and then the rebuilding of the family connections,
Yeah.
right? Which is what you're sharing. Can I know we only have about like 10 minutes left, but if you can share a little bit on why safe and trauma-informed housing is important for building out these family reconnections in reentry, right? And the importance of that in reuniting families.
Of course. So, despite, you can have a great job, you can have, your job can provide you the food and the resources that you need, but stability, your house, that's your foundation, that is your safe space. That's where you should be able to go in and you can, lay all the worries, all the concerns of the day down, and that is your bonding time, your that time that you have with your family, with your kids, with your significant other, with your other, direct family members, because that's your space. Nobody's there but you. And when you don't have that, like we have a reentry curriculum, is called, it's RRR, Renew Your Mind, Rebuild Your Life, Restore Your Rights. And that first component of renewing your mind, reestablishing your familiar relationships, whether it be family, your close friends, that's so important, because it doesn't matter if you have everything that you need. If it's not right mentally, it doesn't even matter. And one of the things that helps you get it right mentally is having that safe space, that foundation of housing. I know for myself, when I came home, I owned a home before I left. I lost it like a few months before I came home. And just coming home and not knowing where I'm going to lay my head. And then for years having to live here, at this friend's house, that person's house, getting this person to put a place, for me in their name, staying at hotels, for months at a time. It was very draining. It's mentally hard, and it makes what you're trying to do, rebuilding your life and having those relationships, it makes it harder because of the tension. I remember at one point we had a little studio apartment, and it was me and my two sons laying next to each other on the floor, for months until we could do better. And but it creates a lot of tension, and it makes it harder to reconnect and have those relationships when you don't have that foundation. I always look at housing and home as the foundation. And when your foundation is not solid, it makes it difficult for you to, be productive or, move ahead and make any progress.
100%. Thank you for sharing that, Gem. And, you know, I would love to know for folks that are listening on here, right? And specifically, I'm speaking to reentry providers,
Yeah.
right? What do you think that reentry providers can do to build better partnerships, right, with child welfare systems to support mothers' returns home?
So that's a good question, and it's a tricky question because sometimes it's the system that doesn't want the relationship. They don't provide the transparency, which was very relevant during the time of COVID because there were so many organizations and other stakeholders out here that had resources that wanted to help, but those systems didn't want to they're afraid of being exposed. So they're not being transparent or not wanting the help because they're scared that you're going to see the gaps, in their work and what they're not doing and the things that they're not doing well. So it's very hard. So our approach is when trying to establish relationship with systems is to come in a way that we're making it clear to them that we're not coming in to try and govern you. We're not coming in to try and judge you. We're just coming to provide the help for the health and the safety of the mothers and the babies and the kids. That's it. That's all. That kind of helps soften, them being so defensive, and helps them to be a little more open with you. It's definitely all in their approach because if they feel any way that, oh, they're here to check us out and, see what we're doing wrong, they're not gonna allow any type of relationship. So approach, I would say, is the key thing in how you approach to build that relationship.
Absolutely. And the other key word that you're sharing is relationship,
Yes.
right? Having that partnership is essential in your approach as well. And so for finally, for those who are listening and really want to get involved, because I know we have folks that really want to get involved and support your work, right? And bring some of these practices even into their own communities. Can you share what opportunities does RestoreHer currently offer um, for service providers, advocates, or even policymakers, right,
Sure.
who really want to strengthen family reunification outcomes?
Yeah. So right now we've introduced the Women's Care Act in California, Alabama, North Carolina, South Carolina, and still working here in Georgia. Also, we just had our Data is Life conference over the was it last look, I've been in DC, I've been everywhere. So I think it was last weekend is when we did it. And there we launched, we have again, I said we have a reentry curriculum that's online, renew your mind, rebuild your life, restore your rights. And it can be accessed as rrru.org to get to it. We also launched a mobile app called Access. And it stands for Active Community Connections equals Safe Solutions. Access is really important to us because one of the gaps for me coming home was, like I said, when I got home, I didn't know where to look, where to start, what to do first for what I needed. I didn't know who was out there, who was providing what. And so, but what I did have, and what most people do get when they get home, is a phone. So for me, it was important to put all of those resources on a mobile app. And so the way the app works is the individual goes on, creates a profile, and they select the help, the resources, or whatever it is that they need. And any organization or stakeholder that provides those resources and services within a 50-mile radius pops up to them. So now they know where to go and where to look. It gives them that direction. And they also have the option to chat directly with, whoever that is, that organization or that provider on the mobile app. So we're really excited about that. And, we're inviting all of the reentry people, anybody that does direct services, anybody that has resources that want to get them to folks that are returning home. We welcome them to be part of access of the mobile app.
Wow.
Yeah,
I was gonna say too, Pamela, because we share resources after this session, and so some of those resources I wasn't even aware of, and so I'm like, please share those with me, and so then we can share those with our team, so
sure.
they can share with people who have joined today's conversation, and so folks can have access to that and just be involved. Are there any other resources that you wanted to share?
We're getting ready for a symposium in October. It's gonna be out on the West Coast, in Los Angeles. It's our Her Value Symposium and Retreat. This symposium is part of our TRASH program. TRASH is our qualitative research program. Is built around storytelling through mixed media. Because of my own experience, I know how difficult it is to talk about experiences that we've lived through. So we invite women to share their experiences through mixed media, whether it be film, art, however they want. They're comfortable with sharing it. That's what they do. And the symposium is to showcase these stories and make people aware of what women that are incarcerated and have been incarcerated and are in the reentry space are dealing with. So they are more supportive of the work that we're doing, to move the needle forward. And that's going to be October the 11th in Los Angeles.
Beautiful. Her Value, October 11th. You heard it here, everybody. So
Yes,
excited for
St.
that.
St. Felix is the venue. It's
Say
located
it
in
again.
Hollywood. St. Felix.
Felix. Okay, perfect. Perfect. Awesome. Well, as we are closing out, if you can, I mean, you have dropped gems, information, resources, and just inspiration for us all. And I would love if you can, one piece of advice or encouragement you'd give to others working to support family reunification.
Um, So for me, one thing I always say is, it's a lot of work and it's hard work. It's not easy, but we cannot give up. We have to, I always say fight like hell. We fight like hell to get stuff done. You must fight like hell. And I know for women, we hold our families close to us, and so, and I know that we, when it comes to the kids, when it comes to the moms, we do fight like hell to protect them and to do whatever we got to do to make sure that they're taken care of. And I just say, just stand steadfast, even when it looks like it's not going well, it's not going to work, and when people are telling you that you can't and telling you no, just let it go in and go out. Because what I do know based on everything that I've done is that you can, and it can happen despite, how hard it looks and how much they tell you it's not going to happen. So my best advice is to keep trying and don't give up, because trust me, like I said, I don't sleep on the floor. I don't lived in hotels. We ain't had nothing to eat some days, but I didn't let that deter me. I just kept going, and here I am now.
Pamela, thank you so much. You have so much love in the chat box. I don't know if you are able to see people sharing their
Um,
information.
but thank you, everyone that I don't see.
Yeah.
A couple
And
of
we
people.
also have one of our sisters in the chat, Miss Coco.
Coco, I
Who
saw her. Yes.
Uh-huh. Yep, Ms. Coco supporting part of the Sisters in Solidarity Network, saying it's gonna take us to save us. And
Yes,
I couldn't agree
exactly.
more. I couldn't agree more. Pamela, thank you so much again for sharing your time, your story, your wisdom with us today. It is a powerful reminder that family unification is not just like a personal milestone. It's a community priority. It needs to be a community priority. It's also a reproductive justice issue,
Yeah.
right? And it can also be a pathway for healing generations to come. And so, as we've heard here for everyone, reuniting families should be a core component in your reentry program, your services. And it's not just about opening the door after incarceration for women, and specifically for Black women. It requires reentry programs to be very intentional, right? Around not just their programs, but
Right.
also policies, as
Mhm.
what Ms. Pamela was sharing today, and meeting women where they are, honoring their role as caregivers, and most importantly, dismantling these systematic barriers that are standing in their way. And so, from the bottom of my heart, thank you again, Pamela, so much. And I know
Thank you.
you're receiving so much love in the chat box. I promise, folks, we're going
Excellent.
to share everything with you after today's session.
Oh,
And this
Vivian, hi,
is
Vivian.
this is only the start. And so we have a part 2 coming up on family reunification that's going to be held September 8th from 12 to 1 p.m. Eastern. And this is also going to feature one of our other Sisters in Solidarity Network members, featuring the Rich Family Ministries from New Orleans, who are going to be touching on
Excellent story on
participatory.
family reunification. Excellent
Say
story.
again?
I said she has an excellent story on family reunification.
Yes, Fox, y'all. Fox is going to be joining us, and they're going to be touching a little bit on participatory defense movements in New Orleans. And so hopefully y'all can join us. So we invite you to join us for future sessions, because this is a part 1, part 2, and a part 3. And loving this opportunity to be with you again, Pamela, and just thank you so much for sharing your insights. And for everyone being here, thank you all for being here. And I hope to see you for part 2, folks. So
Yes.
thank you so much.
Thank y'all.
Thank you.